Hello, 16-bit hockey fans, to yet another edition of the NHL 94 podcast. Today, I'm going to be joined by somebody who has a storied past. He's a freelance journalist. He's been with the Hockey News since 2011. He's the host of the Puck Junk podcast. He's wearing the wonderful shirt. If you could show it off, the lovely shirt over there. This man enjoys his hockey games, his hockey video games, in fact. He has talked to the legendary JR about NHL 94. So I present to you the man, the myth, the legend, Sal J. Berry. Sal, how are you, buddy?
Oh, I thought that was when I was supposed to applaud. I'm sorry.
Everybody's supposed to applaud. You're the guy that we're applauding for. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show here and talk about NHL 94 and a few other things. But yeah, just secondly, this has been a long time coming. For people who are unaware, we've been trying to get this done for quite some time. And scheduling conflicts, and then an illness, and then technical issues. Well, third time's a charm. Here we are. But either with that being said, Sal, thanks for coming on. And how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you for putting this off a bit. I was sick last time we tried to talk. I had this sinus infection, cold, allergy reaction to the change in weather, whatever. So I was just not feeling too great. So I'm glad that I can talk now and actually have my wits about me and sound halfway normal. My voice is normally this high, but at least I'm not congested or coughing or anything like that. So yeah, I'm excited to get to talk hockey video games. My podcast, we mainly talk about hockey cards. We don't really talk about video games so much. So just having the opportunity to get to chat about NHL 94 with a mega fan like you is something I've been looking forward to.
This is going to be a lot of fun, but we're not just going to talk about NHL 94. There's a few other things I want to talk about that as well. Like number one, for instance, you're based out of Illinois. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in Chicago.
Perfect. And it's a storied hockey town, and the Madhouse on Madison, unfortunately, no longer there, but we could talk about that just a little bit. Just want to know when it is you started watching hockey, and do you enjoy watching other sports as well?
I'll answer the second question first. No, I don't really enjoy watching other sports. I've tried to get into baseball. I've tried to get into football. Football I could kind of get into. I could watch football. Just the Bears are such a terrible football team. But I grew up when they went on that run in 1985 and they won Super Bowl 20. So of course, when you first notice sports as a kid and you're like, oh, the Bears are a good team. Oh, and they won the championship, right? And then I didn't realize that for the next 40 years, they would be disappointing. But really what got me into sports was when I discovered hockey. And the thing about that is the Blackhawks were buried on cable television since the early 80s in Chicago. And they didn't televise their home games. Their road games were only on cable TV. We didn't have the money for cable TV in the 80s. In fact, I didn't know anybody with cable TV. And we finally got cable television in early 89. And I was channel surfing. And I stumbled upon a Blackhawks game. I was flipping between two TV shows. And I hit you'll appreciate this. You're in Canada?
Yes.
So, of course, you remember SCTV?
Sure do.
So that to me was new. I had never seen SCTV before, but they were showing these reruns. So I used to watch SCTV whenever I could. And I was flipping between that and a biography about Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights leader. So I was flip-flopping between the two shows, and I put in the wrong number, and I ended up stumbling upon a Blackhawks game. So it was just totally by chance that I caught the last 3 minutes of the Blackhawks playing the Buffalo Sabres. And then they said, our next game will be Saturday. Tune in. And I said, okay, I'll tune in. And I did. And I watched that. And I remember, I don't know if it was later that night or if it was the next weekend, but then I watched another Blackhawks game. And then the game immediately after that was a Kings-Penguins game in 1989. And I was hooked to see Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky play against each other. I mean, couldn't think of two better teams to really sell you on the sport at that time. Even though the Penguins were not a great team in 89, they were on their way up, and the Kings were, the Kings, and they had Gretzky. So yeah, so that's kind of how I got into hockey. It was by accident, but then that was the first time I really said, this is a sport that I like. This is a sport that I want to watch. This is a sport that I want to collect. This is a sport that I want to like try to be involved in as many facets as I can. So that's kind of the long story, but it's just funny how everybody, well, no, not everybody, but certain things you inherit from your parents. Like a lot of Canadians have told me, oh, I don't remember how I got into hockey. It was just always there. So I just got into it. Right. And when you're a little bit older, it's like when you discover that, like, that really good rock album or comic book or movie or something because somebody shows it to you, somebody shares it with you, or you just stumble upon it by accident and your life has changed. So it was really a life-changing moment for me in like a very good, positive way.
Yeah, and the Blackhawks in the 80s, just like the rest of the Norris teams, they were just a stepping stone for the Patrick division. No, Smythe division, sorry.
Smythe division, yeah. And the thing was is that the Blackhawks did have competitive teams, but yeah, they were like the best of the worst. They did turn it around in the early 90s. I mean, when they had guys like Ed Belfour, Jeremy Roenick, Chris Chelios, you know what I mean? Then they started to really assemble a great team. And, you know, they made some pretty deep runs. They won the President's Trophy one time. Of course, they lost in the first round of the playoffs. But, you know what I mean? They became...
To the Stars, too. North Stars with that.
North Stars, yeah. I'm still scarred by that. But it was, you know, but yeah, you're right. They were kind of a stepping stone. But then again, everybody was kind of a stepping stone to the Edmonton Oilers by then.
Yeah, it was either them or the Flames, because between those two teams in the starting from 84, it was either the Flames or the Oilers were in the finals. And just they dominated. Such great teams from Alberta. And the Blackhawks at that time, they were rough and tough between like Al Secord, Ben Wilson, Doug Wilson too is a tough as nails defenseman, but he could score goals as well. Just a really tough team to play against, and the smaller ice surface and the noise from the Chicago Stadium. Do you have any memories of old Chicago Stadium that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time I heard that goal horn, it scared the bejesus out of me and my friend, because my aunt bought me tickets for my 14th birthday. I discovered hockey about 2 weeks before my 14th birthday. And then it was kind of like my mom was like, oh, yeah, me and your aunt, we used to be hockey fans in the 70s. And I said, well, what happened? And then she's like, well, they stopped showing the games on TV. And so then my mom gives me this box of hockey memorabilia that she kept. It was including a complete newspaper from when the Blackhawks won, or excuse me, when the Blackhawks lost when they lost the 1973 finals. I couldn't remember if it was 71 or 73. They lost both those years to Montreal, but she saved like sports sections and complete newspapers of like the Blackhawks making it to the Cup finals. She had like old Hockey Illustrated magazines. She had a postcard that was autographed by Guy Lafleur when she wrote him a fan letter, and he sent her back a postcard with like his own special stationery that just said Guy Lafleur in the corner, you know, where the return address would go. It just said Guy Lafleur, right? And like a little like logo or icon. And so like she gave me her hockey stuff from the 70s. And then my aunt was like, oh, yeah, we were both hockey fans. Here's my Tony Esposito jersey. You can borrow it. I'm like, cool. So then I had like a hockey jersey, you know, that I gave back to her once I got my own jerseys. But, you know, so like it was kind of like in the family. Like my grandma used to take my aunt to the games in like the 60s. And so like when I finally got to go to a game for my birthday, and I remember it was February 10th of 1989 against the New York Islanders. We're walking up to our seats and like the goal horn goes off and me and my friend just jumped. It scared the hell out of us. And that was such a cool memory that I still remember. I remember that. I remember like the way people would stomp their feet on the ground, and the balconies, the first balcony and the second balcony were stacked one on top of each other, like a birthday cake or like a wedding cake. So like the mezzanine up until like the 6th row was out in the open. And then you had like the first balcony and then the second balcony. So it was, you know, you'd feel when people would stomp their feet, you know, like trying to like make noise. And that was scary. I mean, even being up in the balcony, you'd feel it shake, you know, and they had like a bar, because like a safety bar, so that like you wouldn't fall forward and on top of the person in front of you, because the seats were staggered a lot higher. So you weren't looking around somebody's head. You were kind of looking straight down at the ice. And you had this bar. But yeah, it was a little, you get a little bit of vertigo from that. And I remember during intermission, you'd walk out into the lobby and it would just be full of smoke. because everybody go into the go into the lobby and smoke a cigarette. Two other quick memories I'll share. I remember the 90 conference finals against the Edmonton Oilers. And I just remember like some Yahoo was passing out sparklers. And like during the anthem, like we all started, like somebody would like somebody else's sparkler. So like everybody in our row were holding up sparklers, which, now you would never see that in a hockey game. Like, oh, look, that whole section of people or that whole row of people are holding up sparklers during the anthem. But it was just such a different time back then. I remember that. And I remember going to the All-Star game and then the national anthem and just how loud that was.
Yeah.
And people talk about how like legendary that national anthem was during the 91 NHL All-Star game. So yeah, those are some of my memories. I mean, I could go on and on forever, but we're here to talk video games, right?
Yeah, no, I do have one last question too, because the legendary Nancy Faust, the organist that played in the old Chicago Stadium, but also she played at Comiskey Park as well. Did you ever get to meet her?
No, because by the time I got into hockey, their organist was Frank Pellico.
Oh.
So I did not get to meet her, unfortunately, but I've met Frank Pellico because he's been there since like the late 80s. And, I've talked with him, got his autograph on stuff, got like a Black Hawk book. He'd like send out like, or have like autograph photos that he would sign for people at like the Black Hawk convention and stuff like that. So yeah, I never met her, unfortunately.
And just the fact that you're in Chicago and you love, I guess, the Hawks more than anything else, you must then absolutely love NHL 94. The fact that JR, at least on the Genesis version, he's absolutely incredible. And so is the team. Like you've played the game before, right? Like what are your memories of NHL 94, first playing it? And yeah, I just want to hear about your thoughts on NHL 94, the game.
Well, I mean, I liked it since it was NHL hockey that came out during 91, 92 for the Sega Genesis. My best friend, his brother had a Genesis. And so, when you're like 15, 16, you don't really have anything to do on a Saturday night. You're like too young to go out clubbing. You know what I mean? You can't do much. You're too old to be in bed by 10, but too young to like go out anywhere. So what do? You just end up hanging out with your friend on a Saturday night in his bedroom, watching movies, or he's playing guitar and I'm playing video games or whatever. And I remember his brother had NHL hockey for Genesis, and I'd go there and play his Genesis because I didn't have a Genesis. I had a Nintendo. And so it was just exciting whenever I got to play Genesis. And I remember playing NHL hockey and just getting really into it right away. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. 5-on-5. It has real teams. It doesn't have names, but okay, we know who number 99 on the Kings is supposed to be, or number 66 on the Penguins. It was super easy to like pick a fight. It was a lot of fun. It was just a fun game. And then I remember when NHLPA Hockey 93 came out for Genesis and Super Nintendo. I had a Super Nintendo by then. I mean, I got it kind of like not when that game came out, but when I finally got one, I bought that game for it. And I just remember like liking it because it was an improved version of the NHL hockey game. And then when NHL 94 came out, honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to buy it yet because there were a lot of hockey video games that year. There was like NHL Stanley Cup. I believe Pro Sport Hockey came out that year. I know ESPN Hockey Night either came out that year or the next year. There was also Brett Hull Hockey. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't know if that was the next season. I think ESPN Hockey Night was the next season. There's actually a funny story about that and a game that came out called Road to the Cup. I'll save that for later in the podcast.
I do want to talk about that. Yes.
Okay, I'm glad you got that on your radar. But so it was just like, well, do I want to buy NHL Stanley Cup hockey? Because they were posting like Mode 7 graphics where you're always behind the player. And when you turn, the whole perspective turns. And that looked really cutting edge. And then I remember like I had a coupon for like that I could use for either NHL Stanley Cup or Super Mario Kart. And I go, well, Mario Kart looks kind of fun and it's got good reviews. So I bought Mario Kart, but then I still needed to have a new hockey game. So then like the next week I went and I bought NHL 94 and I'm glad that I did because, I enjoyed the hell out of it. I had the Super Nintendo version. I got both versions now, but the one that I played was Super Nintendo. Me and my friend Steve, I'd go to his house. I'd bring the game. We'd play it there. We'd play it over by my house. Like I'd play against the computer, or I'd play against like a friend. So it was a fun game. I mean, I remember ruining a friend's birthday party by bringing my copy of NHL 94 to his party, because I go to his party and, you know, he has other kids over there. You know, we're all like in our teenage years and late teens. And he wanted to role play. He wanted to do like not Dungeons and Dragons, but like another role play style of game. And I brought my Super Nintendo and like my games. And he was like, "Oh, I thought we'd role play." I go, "Well, it's your birthday. We'll do whatever you want." But then the other kids saw that I brought a Super Nintendo. So then they're like, "Well, maybe we could hook up Sal's Super Nintendo and just, you know, maybe like check it." You know what I mean? And then you know where that goes. So then it got to the point where like the people who weren't role playing, they would like run over and they'd like play a game. And then like my friend would be like, "Hey, it's your turn to roll the dice." And then he'd like pause the game. One of them would run over, roll the dice, do his thing, and then run back. So I like felt terrible that like I kind of ruined his birthday unintentionally. I thought I was making it more fun by bringing a next gen for the time console over. But then I remember like all of us just ended up like taking turns playing NHL 94. And because I was better than everybody else, I'd play as the Ducks just to make it fair. I'd play as the Ducks and let the other people play as like the Eastern Conference or Western Conference All-Stars, just to keep it, just to keep it kind of fair, because they were like figuring it out. And I was like, I knew what I was doing by that point.
And you did the right thing, I think, by first buying Mario Kart and then buying NHL after that. Because let's be honest, Mario Kart, even today, is still a phenomenal game, phenomenal series. I'll never knock that. And if I have a chance to pick it up and play it, I would, just because it's such a good game. Even the SNES version, I loved. It's got such good memories. But I have a question. It sounds like to me you guys did not have, or you didn't have, the multi-tap, that little device that enables you to hook up, I think, up to 5 controllers to the SNES, so you could play more than 2 people on the NHL 94.
Yes,
so
correct. I didn't have it.
Too bad.
At the time, it only came with Super Bomberman.
Okay.
I don't know if you could have bought it individually, but you like, and so it was just kind of like a thing where like, I think you had to buy a game to get it. So it seemed a little like, oh, I got to buy this game. But then it's just like, I don't even think I knew like 4 other people who want to play it at the same time with me. And then on top of that, you know, like more money, more problems. It's like, okay, well, you buy a multi-tap. Well, guess what? Now you got to buy 3 more controllers, right? So it just becomes more of a problem. Like when you're like 18 and you're just like, okay, now what do I do? Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, nothing was cheap back then. I mean, this game was like $50. Like, and I think like the coupon that I used for like Mario Kart, I want to say it was something crazy, like save $7 or something. And it was like, whoa, $7 off this game. Okay, well, I'm going to buy that game then, you know? But yeah, I will say that when I got a PlayStation a couple years later, and the only reason why I bought that game was so that I could play NHL 2-on-2 Open Ice. Well, by then, between me and my friends, now I'm in college, we had 4 PlayStation controllers. So I remember like being a film student, going to film class, and then like after that, we'd head back to the dorms, and it's like the 4 of us sitting on the couch playing like the Penguins versus the Blackhawks, and you know, getting like an actual 2-on-2 experience. So that's a lot of fun, and I think that is something that's missing from a lot of video games today, is like being able to punch somebody sitting next to you after they beat your ass in a game. Then you just go like, what the hell, right? Like, and we used to do that when we'd play Halo. We'd like link up like 3 Xboxes because we had 3 TVs. Because now I'm post-college, we're all like working real jobs and have like money, can afford PlayStations and TVs and lots of network cable to run everywhere because this is pre-Wi-Fi. And then you could like trash talk the person sitting next to you, or get up and go in the other room and yell at the person, or whatever. And now it's just like all on the internet with a headset. So there's definitely that like kind of like that like visceral, tangible, like I'm playing against somebody next to me and they're my friend. You know, now you're just playing some 12-year-old kid who's like poning your ass. Oh, sorry. I don't know if I can swear.
You can. No, you
That's
can
about as worse as I'm going to get here.
No problem at all, Sal. So just to give you a heads up, before COVID, so in 2019 and even in or very early 2020, my previous job, what we used to do, we all brought our old Xbox 360s and we brought them into the special boardroom we had. We had the IT guy that was on our side, and we hooked them up. We had 4 screens, and we used to play Halo in the same boardroom. This is just a few years ago, 4 years ago, we were doing this. And so I still remember this vividly. Those memories are still very strong for me. So I had a lot of fun doing that. 2-on-2 open ice. Did you play that at the arcade?
I did.
Great game. Did you happen to notice that Guy Bear, for whatever reason, was George Vezina reincarnated? For whatever reason, he seemed like the best goalie in that game, and he was like just a brick wall, and nobody was allowed to play with Anaheim because he was just too good. Do you remember that, or am I just the only one dreaming this?
I don't remember that. I know, like, when I played the coin operated version, like the mall that I worked a job at the time had that. So I'd like go there after my shift ended and I'd go play NHL open ice. And it was just so cool. Like you would save like your data, right? You know, you type in your name and it would save your information. And so you could I think you could pick up where you left off. I don't remember. I don't remember now. Honestly, I do remember typing in my initials a few times. I didn't necessarily get high scores at that game, but either way, what was great about that was the Black Hawk announcer did the play-by-play.
Yeah, he did.
Because Midway Games is in Chicago. So they did, Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, NHL Open Ice. These are all Midway Games. They're in Chicago. Actually, I know one of the programmers who worked on Open Ice and Mortal Kombat. He's actually a colleague of mine at the university that I teach at. So I've brought that up to him before. And I think I sent him an NHL 94 article, and he's like, okay, Sal, I'll allow one time for you to not talk about Open Ice, because that was the game he worked on. But yeah, I mean, it was, the games were fun back then because they felt like games and not like simulations. And, you show anybody like a new NHL game, and to the uninclined, they always say, wow, this looks and feels like a TV broadcast. And I go, yeah, it does. But it also and that's okay. Maybe we like the presentation, but like the gameplay is just so involved. And I get it. I mean, I have this, now I'm getting into more of like game theory, but I think for me, I lost interest in games when they moved away from being games and they moved towards being simulations. Because once you move from 2D to 3D, first-person shooters, first-person view, sports gaming going 3D, what did they do? They tried to make these games more and more realistic. And so then the problem is that when something becomes too realistic, then it stops being fun because there's too many restraints on it. I mean, you've played Monopoly, right? You've played Risk. Okay, war is nothing like Risk. You know what I mean? You can have more than 12 armies on one country. If you own a continent, you don't get bonus armies. They don't just parachute from the sky, right? But it's a game, right? We have fun. It's the rules of that game, and it's make-believe, right? And so I think that's why you see like this big push over the years for indie games, independent games, and a lot of stuff that's like low tech. I mean, look at like what kids love. They love Minecraft.
Yeah.
And they love Roblox. And they don't love it because it's realistic. They love it because it's cartoony and it's fun. And so there's like this pushback in, I mean, you see it in toys also. I mean, some of the most popular toys are Funko Pop figures, which look nothing like the characters do in real life or the actors, or you've probably seen like the Alex Ovechkin Funko Pop or like the Sidney Crosby Funko Pop. And they're like super deformed, chibi, cartoony style versions of those players, right? But they're appealing because they're not realistic. They're not a McFarlane figure, for what it's worth, So anyway,
let's scale it back to 94. When is the last time you played it?
I probably played it a couple months ago when I was working on an article for Hockey News. I just wanted to remember some things about it, and I also needed to get a screenshot of like the opening screen where Ron Barr welcomes you, and then he like shows like the player matchups. because one of the things I mentioned in my article for Hockey News, and it was like 7 fun facts about NHL 94, 10 fun facts. I think it was 10 fun facts. I can't remember. And I've even lost count of how many fun facts I put into that article. But one of the facts, it was 10. One of the facts was how the Ducks and the Panthers appear on their old teams in the Genesis version.
Right.
So I needed a screenshot of like the matchup showing John Van Beesbrook on the Rangers versus John Van Beesbrook on the Panthers, and it was just kind of funny how, you could have like a goalie play against himself, or you could even have like a skater hit himself if you like had them, if you were playing like, whatever team Scott Mellenby was like on the Flyers before he was on the Panthers, right? So if you played Panthers versus Flyers, you could have that matchup have them face off against themselves.
You can still do that in the NES version, though. If you had the All-Star team, one of the All-Star teams play off against, say the East.
You can, but that's kind of expected. It's kind of you can absolutely, you can have Gretzky versus Gretzky,
right,
totally do that, and that's kind of funny, but I mean, I guess if you're playing an all-star team versus like another team, you kind of expect that, but like if you're just like playing with like rosters that like just two regular teams, you think the rosters would be a little more, well, as good as they could be. The Genesis version came out first, so the SNES version is more up to date because it just came out later. It was based on the Genesis version. The programmer for the SNES version basically took the Genesis version and then ported it over to Super Nintendo.
So you are impartial. You prefer to play the SNES version because that's what you had growing up, and you tended to play that over the years. So if you had a choice to pick and choose between the SNES versus the Genesis in '94, you're sticking with the SNES version?
Well, yeah, but I mean, part of it is because the music is just so much better. Have you heard the intro theme for NHL 94 on SNES?
Absolutely. Yeah, I played it a few days ago on my emulator here. So yeah, it is different.
It's pretty epic, man. I mean, compared to the Genesis one, just kind of like, I get that it didn't have the same sound technology. That's what Genesis people are always like, oh, it didn't have the same sound chips. And it came out Genesis came out in like 91 and SNES, or maybe 89. I mean,
it did come out in 89 or maybe even 88 in Japan, but certainly 89 it was there.
Right. And SNES didn't come out until like 91 in the US. Right. So like it had a couple years, to like improve upon the technology. But, I listened to NHL 94 and I'm just like, this music rocks, and then I listen to like the Genesis version and I go, oh, this puts me to sleep.
I see that. That's funny because I've played 99% of my NHL 94 career has been playing on the Genesis version. So when I hear the SNES version, I give it credit. It does sound good, but for whatever reason, just because of familiarity, I prefer the Genesis version. So I guess because I've been trained, it's just I've been brainwashed to like that better over time. But either way,
okay.
Yeah, it's they're both great games and a lot of fun, and I'm not going to sit here and say one is better than the other. I've talked to people on both sides of the fence, and I think everybody's just happy we're playing the game still because there is an online community. You're aware of that there's a Discord. Sal, you got to get into it, man. You got to start playing and start joining in.
I just don't have the time. I am really just kind of like a casual gamer. I mean, one thing I did do is I backed on Kickstarter that ODR Hockey Heroes game. That's like an independent game. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it's like
I've seen pictures of it. I haven't.
Yeah, and that looks like a lot of fun, and it has kind of like a story mode, but it also has like an arcade mode, and it's like a 2-on-2 or 3-on-3, and it's meant to be like a very pick up and play kind of game. And I know NHL 94 is like that, but I just I like talking about the game. I'll play a game every now and then, but I just don't feel like I could commit to a season. And that's not fair to, the opponents who are like, come on, Sal, it's Sunday night. We got to get our game in. And it's like,
I guess, if you're in that situation, it would be more like a chore rather than anything else. That's fair. So you wrote, I want to talk about one of the articles you wrote. I want to talk about actually quite a few of them, but you wrote one about the 25th anniversary back in 2018. And I read the article. I want to know, did you end up talking at that time? Did you talk to Mark Lesser or Michael Brook when you wrote that article?
I talked with both of them.
And coming away from it, like, what were your thoughts about talking? Because they're legendary in the game of '94. So, like, what did you take away from talking to them?
I mean, Brook is a big hockey fan. He loved the Flyers in the '70s, and he loved that like run and gun, rough and tumble, hard hitting style of play. And it was just funny because the way I met him was just so by chance. You know how there was that NHL '94 set of trading cards.
Yes.
He actually got the set here next to me if we talk about that. So I got it on hand. But like for some reason they didn't do 6 cards of the Rangers players. They did 6 cards of every team, and they only did 5 cards of Rangers players. And so on my Puck Junk blog, I do this series called The Lost Cards about hockey cards that were supposed to come out but didn't. And I said, well, that card should have been Esa Tikkanen, but instead in its place was another designer tip card. So then I made like a custom Esa Tikkanen card, and I said, this is what it would look like. I don't know why he wasn't included in the set. And then like one day, Michael Brook leaves a comment to my blog post, and he's like, this was a great story. Thank you. But honestly, we just overlooked Esa Tikkanen. It was just a total overlook on our part. So then I reached out to him a couple years later, and I said, hey, I'm writing this article. I'll hold up one of the cards. One of the NHL '94 cards. But, and I said, I'm doing this article for Hockey News. Would you talk to me? He's like, yeah, of course. I mean, and so I talked with him. Then he got me in touch with Mark Lesser. And then I was able to find Amory Wong, who did the programming for the SNES version. And then I talked with like one of the composers on the soundtrack. And I talked with like anybody that I could. Like I left no stone unturned. That became like a total passion project for me. The fact that the Hockey News was like, yeah, okay, you can write an oral history about NHL '94. And they were like all for it. Like they weren't just like, okay, maybe write it on spec and we'll see. I had written a few oral histories by then. I did one about the movie Sudden Death. I did another one about the movie Youngblood. I did another one about the Mighty Ducks movie. So then I was like, for the next one, I'm like, I want to do a video game instead of a movie. And they're like, yeah, okay, go for it. And it was a good article. And I say that because I talked with a lot of people and I got a really solid picture of how the game came to be and all the factors that influenced it and kind of made it what it was. It wasn't just like this game came out and people loved it and the weight bug. I mean, that's mentioned, but all the other stuff that goes into it, from like the consulting that Barry Melrose did, or John McIntyre, who was also on the Kings. He's credited as a special thanks. So I talked to him as well, to Jeremy Roenick, and of course even Andy Moog, who's on the cover of the photo on the box, So yeah. It was a good. Yeah, but talking with Mark and Mike, that was great to talk to them, of course.
There's a bit of a legend around Ken Baumgartner and the fact that he was part of the NHLPA, and he was one of the lowest ranking players in NHL '93 or NHLPA '93. And so there was something to do with like him being such a low ranked player, and going to '94, they're not going to make the players that low ranked because he, granted he was a goon. He wasn't a dummy. I believe he was college graduate. I could be wrong in that, but he certainly had a head on his shoulders. He wasn't just a guy out there with some fists that are just ready to fight. But did you end up talking to Baumgartner at all about?
I didn't talk to Baumgartner. I just heard Michael Brook's account of the story, because what had happened was the Players Association was looking over the game, for approval, and he's waiting out in the lobby. And then when they're done, Baumgartner walks up to him and says, yeah, I'm Ken Baumgartner. I'm the guy you gave a 0 for intelligence. And that was the stat, was intelligence. And he said, okay, at that point I realized we had to take this a little more serious, and maybe intelligence wasn't the right word. Maybe it was offensive awareness, because then, they had like offensive awareness and defensive awareness. But before that, they had intelligence. And he's like, look, this guy had like 1 point in like 70 games. He's not going to really help your team win. But yeah, that was the story. But I'm retelling the story from
right.
So it's not firsthand. I'm not a firsthand source on that.
No, I thought it was rather funny, and also the fact that, I mean, I just want to reiterate, Baumgartner is no dummy. Like he is rather intelligent. So yeah, but
I mean, and it's funny too, because I mean, you look at, like, say, George Peros went to Princeton, captained their hockey team. Sean Cronin, he went to the University of Illinois of Chicago. He played on the UIC Flames back when Chicago had an NCAA Division I hockey program. But when he played for the Winnipeg Jets, he was an enforcer. They called him Cronin the Barbarian, right? And then even look at, like, Stu Grimson. I mean, when he retired, what did he do? He went to law school. The guy's a lawyer, right? So yeah, it's definitely a stereotype.
I didn't know that Grimson went to the law school. Imagine getting represented by the Grim Reaper in when you go to court. That'd be pretty funny. Like,
that would be pretty funny, yeah.
You talked to JR about.
I did a couple times, honestly. I talked to him for the game's 20th anniversary. I did an interview with him for Beckett Hockey Magazine, and then I talked with him in 2018 for the 25th anniversary article that I wrote for the Hockey News. And I also talked to him, this was unrelated, but for like a Blackhawk convention article.
Mm-hmm.
So I've talked to him a few times. He's cool. I mean, what else am I going to say? He's one of my favorite players growing up. So,
yeah, I mean, he's an absolute legend in the game at that too. I mean, he is well aware of the fact that at that time when you spoke with him for a few years back, was he even aware that his status within the NHL community, NHL 94 community, that he is in a godlike level? Because now obviously he knows, but back then, was he aware at that time too?
No, I don't think he really understood it until the scene in Swingers with Vince Vaughn playing in the NHL. Well, they're actually playing, as you know, NHLPA 93, but
yeah,
they're like, oh, they took fighting out of this game. You can't make Gretzky's head bleed anymore, or whatever. But like, yeah, I mean, now he knows that, and he talks about, you talk to him about it, and he'll say, yeah, he's like, if I had like $1 for every time somebody brought that up to me, I'd never have to work again, which is funny. I don't think he has to work again anyway, but you know what I mean? Like, he goes, you know what? That's okay. That's my claim to fame. It's pretty cool to be liked for something outside of your career and something positive, like being ranked up there with like Mike Tyson and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, or Sonic the Hedgehog, or Super Mario, or Bo Jackson and Temco Bowl, or whatever, right? Like, he thinks it's a cool thing, at least what he's told me about it a couple times.
And he's now a Hall of Famer, just recently been selected as a...
time, man. About time.
Yeah, how many years has he been on the ballot?
Well, he retired at the close of the 08-09 season, so he would have been eligible in 2012. So about 12 years.
So he probably, if he didn't make it this time, he probably didn't have too many opportunities left, because you don't stay on forever on the ballot.
Well, no. What's happening, though, is like, you'll notice, like, was it last year Doug Wilson was inducted? Or 2 years ago?
But he deserves, he was a great player, and he's been a great office guy too, and general manager. So like he's covered both sides of the fence. So Doug Wilson definitely deserves to get in.
No, I'll tell you what happened. Doug Wilson used to be the player representative for the Chicago Blackhawks in the Players Association. And I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe he was even the NHLPA president at one time, or maybe not president. Well, I know they have like a CEO or whatever, but as far as like the player reps go, he was up there, because Doug Wilson is a smart man. Obviously, we've seen that as the GM for the Sharks. So the thing is that when you have a player who's beyond being a player, he's one of the player reps. The player reps are who goes to war with the owners whenever there's a strike, whenever there's a lockout, whenever there's some sort of disagreement between the players and the owners, right? So Wilson was blacklisted for a long time. What happened now is a lot of the old selection committee people in the Hall of Fame have retired or died, or moved on. I mean, it's old, right? Hockey has a long memory for things, right? So they'll be like, oh, Wilson, we're not going to vote for that guy. He was the guy who stood up to Bill Wirtz and did that. Another thing, like the way Wilson ended up on the Sharks, he basically strong-armed a trade to get on the Sharks because he had a no trade clause. He told Mike Keenan, the coach and GM of the Blackhawks, I'm not going to play for you anymore, so I can retire or you could trade me. Well, he was an asset. So, of course he was going to trade him for something, but he said, I'll only approve a trade to the Sharks. Why? Because he knew when he retired, he'd be able to get a job with the Sharks. Easier to get a job with the Sharks than the Red Wings, especially in 93, team that hasn't been around that long. So, now you've got guys like Lanny McDonald who played against Doug Wilson and said, this guy's awesome. He should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not quoting Lanny on that, but I'm saying they were peers. Lanny doesn't care that Doug was a player rep because they were peers of each other. They played around the same time together. And so you're getting that now. Same thing with Roenick. Roenick spoke his mind. Roenick wanted to be paid what he was worth. That's why he got traded to the Coyotes. That left a bad taste, not with the fans, but with the Blackhawk organization. And when you have somebody like when Bill Wirtz was alive, he still had a lot of pull in the league, even though he was no longer chairman of the board as far as the owners go, right? So that's the thing. We're starting to see guys like Roenick and Wilson and probably other players who should have been in it, but maybe they were like blacklisted. But the thing is that the Blackhawks ownership and you've heard of Alan Eagleson, right?
Sure.
So Eagleson, who was in charge of the Players Association and robbing the players, Bill Wirtz, the owner of the Blackhawks, and then Ziegler, the former president of the NHL, they were all like this. The three of them worked in cahoots with each other to kind of basically keep salaries down, keep the free agency rules prohibitive. And, and then when you have players who stand up for themselves and say, no, this needs to change. Well, of course, the powers that be are not going to like that. And boy, we went way off topic here. And I'm sorry.
No, that's an interesting topic because I haven't. I'll be honest, I had no idea Ziegler, Eagleson, and Wirtz were in cahoots. This I know. I watched hockey at that time. We're talking the late '80s and mid '80s too. But I still don't understand. I still don't know the history of that, and I find it to be rather fascinating. I mean, unfortunately for the players, they felt the brunt of it, and still to this day, they're still trying to correct measures that were instituted on them. Like it's just too bad. But yeah.
I mean, it wasn't by coincidence that Bobby Orr ended up on the Chicago Blackhawks in '76. Alan Eagleson was Bobby Orr's agent, and he was in cahoots with Bill Wirtz. So Bill Wirtz wanted to get Bobby Orr partially because they were upset that they traded Phil Esposito to the Bruins, and then the Bruins, did really well, won those 2 Stanley Cups, and Phil Esposito rewrote the scoring record. But this was a grudge, going back, 10 years. But on top of that, though, the Blackhawks wanted to get rid of Phil Esposito in the first place because he was a big body, but he didn't play like a big man. You know what I mean? And they wanted him to be more of a power forward, more of a muck it up in front of the net kind of guy. And when Espo got to play his own game, he flourished. So it's funny how all of that just kind of works. How you have something from the 60s that influences the 70s, that influences the 80s, that influences the 90s. I mean, even another thing that the players, when there was the player strike of 92, that was over hockey cards. And to a greater extent, the control of the likeness rights, because they weren't getting paid for being put in the video games.
Is that the strike you're talking about in 94 or 92?
94, 95 was a lockout from the owners.
The CBA ran out, and then I guess they locked them out. That was the situation.
Exactly. So in 92, what happened was in April of 92, hockey cards used to account for about $1 million of revenue. You had Topps, you had O-Pee-Chee. Not too many people were collecting in the 80s. I mean, a lot of people collected in the 80s, but it wasn't like the 90s or now, So by 92, that amount of revenue that hockey cards was generating was $14 million. So it went from $1 million to $14 million in a 2-year span, right? The players used to get all of that money. Now that all of a sudden it was $14 million, the league wanted some of that money. They wanted a lot of that money because remember at the time, the NHL in America was shown on Sports Channel. And for the 91-92 season, they only made $5 million for that television contract. Mm-hmm. So the NHL's making $5 million for its broadcast rights in the U.S. Meanwhile, the players are getting $14 million in revenue for hockey cards. So that was part of it. But then also, like, think like, why did NHL hockey not have player names in it? Because the NHL did not let the players know that that was something that was available to them. The NHL and the NHLPA used the same licensing company to license merchandise. It was Time Warner. So when they went to Time Warner and they said, hey, we're making this video game, Time Warner's like, well, you can have the NHL rights, but not the Players Association rights. In 93, what happened for NHLPA 93, Michael Brook went directly to the Players Association. He didn't go through their licensing agent. He went directly to them and said, hey, I really want to put you guys in this video game. And they said, what video game? We don't know anything about this. We'd love to be in this video game. Oh, and there's money in it too. Great. You know what I mean? So that was that was kind of like the beginning of I don't say the beginning of that turmoil, because there was already turmoil, but this was just throwing gasoline on a fire. Like, wait, we could have made money to be in this video game and you didn't tell us? What else are you hiding from us, right? So then that ended up in a lawsuit that I believe it got settled out of court. I don't know enough about that lawsuit itself. But yeah, so I mean, there was a reason why you had stuff like that. Or, you had like games that had like no player names, team names but no player names, or player names but no team names, because they were just working independently of each other.
So you touched on cards. I think that's a good segue to the NHL 94 trading cards that you have, because you said right beside you, you have the set of those cards. How did you manage to get your hands on that?
Oh, I mailed away for it like we were supposed to, right? Like it came, the Super Nintendo version came with a poster. I wasn't able to dig it out, but I'm sure you've seen it at least once. It basically looked like this, but it looked similar to this, but it was a poster that had like an action shot. I didn't dig it out, but then the game also came with this promotional card that said that you could buy the game. It had like the how to buy on the back, and at this point, I think I had just gotten my first checking account. So anything I could buy, I would, you know what I mean? Like, I'll write a check for that. No, because, like when you're a kid, you're like, Mom, I need a check for $1 to get a free Cobra Commander figure. And she's like, you have enough toys, and whatever. But right. Like, so I mailed away for it. I wish I bought like 5 of the sets, but I only bought 1 because I only needed 1. Still have the box that it came in. But yeah, that's how I got it. It was on my radar. I'm like, oh my God, a hockey card set based on a video game. I'm in. I've been collecting hockey cards almost as long as I've been a hockey fan. Like, I think I probably bought, let's see, I went to my first NHL game in February, and I probably bought my first pack of cards in March. So of 89. So, not too long after.
And you say your favorite year to collect cards was 93, 94. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's just a lot of good stuff going on that year. You had NHL 94. You had the first year of starting lineup hockey figures. You had a lot of great hockey card sets like Upper Deck, Donruss, Leaf, Fleer Power Play, which were like these tall boy cards. So there was just a lot of good stuff that year. It just wasn't NHL 94. That was just like the icing on the top, but not really, because that was a substantial part of it. But like, yeah, there was just a lot of great stuff going on that year for hockey.
And plus the Hawks were still a very good, a very, very competitive team. Just a couple of years earlier, they, as you mentioned, finished first overall in the points, and the next year they went to the finals, and I think they didn't get swept. Did they by the Penguins?
Oh yeah, they did. Big time.
Got swept. Sorry about that.
Yeah, they got. Yeah, no, man, the scars run deep. Even
Hasek played. I remember Hasek had a little bit of time they benched Belfour, I think, in one of the games, and Hasek ended up doing his thing.
Yeah, and he played all right. They could have. The Blackhawks really didn't lose because of Belfour.
No, it was they were up against a team that was just destined to win.
No, but I think games 2 and 3, I want to say they were like 1-0 wins or something. I mean, they were pretty good. I mean, if you can't score a goal, you can't blame your goalie. Yeah. Whether you lose 3-0 or 1-0, you can't blame the goalie if you don't score any goals.
100%.
Yeah. I'll show you this really quick as long as I got this open.
Yeah.
The card set has a card. Let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. Local organ music. And on the back of the card, it says here, Drive the Fans Crazy NHL 94 includes over 70 pieces of new digitized organ music, blah, 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 by San Jose Sharks organist Dieter Rule, exclusively for EA Sports. So it's like, okay, Dieter Rule, who I spoke with for my article, he should really have been in this card set. Instead, they show an Islanders player. I'm not sure who that is. Looks like
What's the number? It looks like 30 something.
35, 30. Is this Mark Fitzpatrick?
Could be.
Yeah, I think so. Right. So it's just not a great card. So when I talked with him, he showed me this and he sent me one. At the Dodgers game, they made a card of him. It looks like an old Donruss baseball card from 88,
it does, right?
You know, but I'm just like, oh my God, he actually does have a trading card. So I put this with my NHL 94 set because that's where it belongs.
Sal, what other goodies do you have beside you that you want to show off?
All right, let's see here. This
because I fear I'm not going to bring it up, and it was going to be a missed opportunity. I want to
No. So I'll show you. Okay, so I got two other pieces of NHL 94 things that I think are pretty cool. One is the official guide.
I've somebody was talking about this. What's the author's name? I think this was talked about very recently in the Discord.
Corey Sandler.
Yes.
Yeah, I also mentioned it in my 10 fun facts about NHL 94 article. Most of it's in black and white,
Right.
I bought this book a couple of years ago. I haven't read it cover to cover. I'm probably never going to. I mean, if I had this in 93, of course, I would have been poring over this. But now, I mean, it's got some color pages inside of it as well. It's just more of like a collector's item.
100%.
I just kind of bought it for that reason. So that was, it's got like stats and everything. But what's interesting is that the guy has his own kind of rating system that's kind of loosely tied around like the ratings in the game, but it's kind of like his own metrics for stuff. And I didn't really get too much into it, but I was like, this is kind of interesting, but this was a cool thing. The other thing is the PC version of NHL 94.
Yes.
Was called NHL Hockey. And old computer games in the 90s, they came out in these big boxes, right? So this is the box that it came in. It comes in a slipcase, right? And so comes with the this is actually not, I don't think this is an instruction manual. No, it is an instruction manual, but it also is like those old NHL guide and record books that have literally it gives you here's Wayne McBean's stats, right? Like it has like a player register for like everybody who played the previous year. So you could actually just look up and say like, hey, how did Corey Millen do? Oh, okay. In 91-92, he got 1 goal and 4 assists with the Kings, and then he got 20 goals and 21 assists for 41 points in 44 games with the Kings. Or 46 games. That's pretty good. You know what I mean? So you could actually do your homework and see how the players did. Remember, folks, this was before Hockey DB.
You're right. That's a good inclusion for buying the game.
But again, if you think about the early history of sports gaming in for computers, a lot of it was simulations. Those original Madden games were simulations. You had the original Wayne Gretzky hockey that came out in 88 or whatever won an award for best sports simulation of the year. So they were very much based on statistics and analysis and simulation, and not so much about hey, is this a fun game to just pick up and play? You know what I mean? But here's the other thing I needed to show you about this. I'm saving the best for last. So on the cover is a Hartford Whaler, and that Hartford Whaler is Steve Conroy, who used to play for the Chicago Blackhawks. After he retired, he ended up being a color commentator. And one year at a Chicago Blackhawk convention, I actually got him to sign the cover of the game.
Very cool.
And he was so excited to see this. I mean, he got like, it was funny because like my girlfriend at the time, she like, we didn't shoot video, but she shot like a bunch of pictures really fast, like using like the burst mode. So I made like this animated GIF of like me handing him the game and him smiling, like getting a big smile. And he's like, he picks it up and like shows it to the person next to him, you know, because he's like so geeked, like, yeah, I was on the cover of this game, you know, like, so, which is funny because it was just such a random picture. And I don't know why they didn't use the same photo of Andy Moog like they did on the SNES and Genesis versions, but that's neither here nor there. It's just part of the lore of the game, you know?
One game that has no lore because it was never released. It's called Road to the Cup Hockey 94.
Yes.
It seemed like this had a lot of promise. It seemed like this would have been, I don't want to say a challenger to NHL 94. Perhaps it may have been, but at the very least, this never came to fruition. So what could you talk about this game? Because a lot of people aren't aware of it, but there is some history here that is tied into NHL 94.
So first of all, I need to thank the people on the NHL94.com message boards because they first made me aware of this, where somebody found an old Usenet post of some guy who posted his resume. And one of the things that he listed on his resume, he was a video game programmer, that he worked on an unproduced game called Road to the Cup Hockey 94. And so I looked up that guy. I ended up interviewing him. He did one version of the game. And then I ended up talking to the guy who did the other version of the game because there was a Genesis programmer and an SNES programmer. And they were working for Park Place Productions. So NHL Hockey and NHLPA Hockey 93 were produced by Park Place. EA was the publisher, but Park Place was the one who actually rolled up their sleeves and did the programming. EA ended up hiring away the programmer from NHL Hockey and NHLPA Hockey 93. Jim Simmons, I believe, is his name. So they hired that programmer away to come work for EA. So they were doing it in-house, right? So Park Place decided that they were going to continue to make hockey games. So their new game was going to be called Road to the Cup Hockey 94. They were producing two versions of the game, but Park Place like missed deadlines and they overpromised and underdelivered, and they just basically got into financial mess, a big financial mess. And they were working with another company called Electrobrain, who was another game company at the time. So like that was, I guess that's who the publisher was going to be. And what I understand is that they really worked on the AI for the game. Like one of the guys who was responsible for the game, he had like all these decision trees, and they basically broke up the ice into like the offensive zone, the defensive zone, and the neutral zone. They broke up into 6 portions. And then they basically said, okay, now how would your forward behave if he was in the offensive zone, left-hand corner, and had the puck, or didn't have the puck? Or what if he was between the circle and the blue line? What would he do with the puck without the puck, right? Like, so there were all these like different AI decision trees, and it was supposed to be a pretty elaborate game for its time with all this different AI that they were trying to put into it. Or AI, you know what I mean? Not like AI today, but where it learns how to do poetry or whatever, but like just like decision trees, right? To make it challenging, to make it more realistic. What is interesting about this is that somewhere along the line, because it was supposed to be a top-down view like NHL 94, NHLPA 93, and actually let me backtrack. They might have even been able to reuse assets from those games because they were able to reuse assets in other games. Like there was Joe Montana football and there was Madden football, and they used a lot of the same things. They kind of dumbed it down for Joe Montana football, but it was like the same graphics, just not as good, you know, maybe not as much shadowing or whatever. And like same, like similar interfaces and stuff. So it was not quite a copy of it, but and they were able to repurpose their graphics from one game for another game. So there is, it could have looked like NHL 94. The thing is that somewhere along the line, they started adding a side view. And the programmers don't know why. Like, wait, why are we adding a side view? And it was because they were in negotiations with ESPN to make the ESPN National Hockey Night game. And so that's why they started adding this alternate camera view. Now, what ended up happening was NHL or ESPN National Hockey Night came out, but there's a rumor that it reused code from Road to the Cup 94.
Oh, so it's carried on at least. Yeah.
In a rumor, because that like the programmers are like, we wouldn't know because we didn't work on it. I mean, a lot of people jumped ship from one company to another company, and people copy files and bring them with them. Things get purchased, this and that. You know what I mean? So like, there's a rumor, and he's like, that's why I think we added that side view, because it was going to get used. That code would have gotten reused for National Hockey Night, but we don't know. So it could have happened. It might have happened. It might not. If Road to the Cup Hockey 94 came out, it could have looked like an NHL 94 game. It could have been like an NHL 94 clone. That's what they were going for. As far as they got in the game, they previewed a demo of it at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago in 1993. No, I did not go. That was the first year it was open to the public, but I was like a senior in high school, and it was like the furthest thing from my mind. But I was told that they had a demo setup of the game, but all you could really do was kind of skate around and pass and shoot the puck. And like, it was just terrible, but they had to have something to show. And so that was, the guy telling me this, 25 years later, he doesn't really remember if it looked exactly like NHLPA Hockey 93 or not, but same idea.
The fact that they had something to showcase at the convention goes to show that at least there's a possibility the code may be available. It may be in a wild somewhere. Granted, it's very unfinished, unpolished. Insert whatever description you want to have, but still, I wonder if there's a possibility somebody has this in their basement on a 3.5-inch floppy somewhere, and we could just maybe see this once again and get some daylight and just show it to the world and see what it potentially could have been. I would love to see if that's even a possibility. But maybe just, me being hopeful. Who the heck knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just funny how that, the two programmers said that they didn't have it. So
yeah,
if they don't have it, I don't know who would, and
that's too bad.
How would you even play it without the right emulation hardware?
I'm sure, there's a lot of bright people out there. If there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're closing in, actually, we're past an hour. So I guess I have one final question for you before we sign off.
Can we talk about the graphic over my shoulder too?
Do that, man. I don't even want to say who they are. Everybody knows who they are, but go ahead.
Everybody knows who they are. So I sell my own original t-shirt designs at shop.puckjunk.com. I drew this illustration, influenced by one of my favorite, if not my all-time favorite hockey video game, of a certain player body checking another certain player.
For the audio side, it's JR checking Gretzky in NHL 94. So
we're number 27 in a red jersey, laying out 99 in a white jersey. But yeah, Gretzky and Roenick. And I sell that at shop.puckjunk.com. It's called 16-bit body check. And you can check it out there if you see this graphic over my shoulder and go, yeah, that's pretty cool. I'd wear that on a t-shirt. So that's why I'm pimping it. So what's your last question?
No, I have one question to do with the t-shirt then. What's the color of it? Is it going to be the ice, that blue colored ice? That's the base color of the shirt?
Yeah, so the color, that's the color of the shirt. The problem is that you're limited to a certain amount of colors. And this one actually, as far as my costs go, this shirt cost me a lot because it uses 7 different colors. It looks like there's more colors. And that's because I mix certain colors together by basically like checkerboarding 2 different colors, like black and red, to make like a darker red. I mean, this isn't like a trade secret. Like people who do this sort of stuff know this sort of stuff,
I
right?
see
You know what
6. So, like with Untrain 9, I could see 6 colors right off the bat.
Well, there's red, white, and black.
Yes.
There's
stick.
green.
The green, yeah. So the stick color, that brownish.
The brown, yep. And then there is the blue of the shadow.
See, I missed that. Okay.
And then there is a different gray. I do make some gray with half toning, but I had to use another gray as well. Like I did everything I could. You try to find that balance of like how few colors can I use versus what looks good, and I played around with different skin tones. I think the skin tone is also one color. I think the skin tone is a mixture between white and red, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look at the artwork again that I sent to the printer. But yeah, it's tricky because like I make these other t-shirts that look like old trading card wrappers, and I got one, but it's outside. It's beyond my arm's reach. But and those might use like 5-6 colors because those are looking more like they're trying to be like 70s or 80s, but then again, I'm a designer, so I want to use as many colors as I can. But then like if you use too many colors, then it's a different printing process. And then that then that increases your cost. And then it's just like, well, I'm not producing, 1 million of these like Nike would. If it was a Nike garment, they would cost next to nothing. But, I print 100 at a time because that's the minimum I can do. But then the trade-off is that like, I have to sell t-shirts for $20, $30, but I sell them at conventions and people love them. I sell them online. People don't love them as much because shipping to Canada is just terrible. Shipping in the US is terrible too, but US to Canada, they just charge us so much money. Again, off topic here. Now we're getting into the geopolitical sphere. And we don't want to do that, but
we're not going to start any wars. Nor will we solve any wars too. So don't worry about that. If somebody wants it, where could they get? What website could they find it at?
Shop.puckjunk.com. So
Perfect.
my puckjunk.com website, there's a shop. You could just click on the shop button, or you could just go to shop.puckjunk.com, whatever is easier to remember.
I'm going to add that to the show notes. But I guess the final question I have is, you're a fan of The Simpsons or not?
Yeah, I mean, as much as anybody was growing up in the 80s and the 90s, I mean, I watched it in the very beginning, and then I kind of lost track of it. Like, after I graduated college, then it maybe wasn't as much of a priority to watch.
Kind of the same with me, but there was one episode, and I think you watched it as well because we're kind of near of the same vintage. Homer J. Simpson was trying to go through this quest to find out what J stood for. And he ended up finding out it stood for J, J-A-Y. So I want to know, what does the J stand for in Sal J. Berry?
Okay, that's Joseph.
Okay.
Sorry, there's no surprise there, but actually I started telling people it stands for genius, like with a J. But not okay, so I do my hockey writing, I do my hockey podcasting. I've also started doing stand-up comedy. So like on Instagram, I'm at puckjunk for my hockey stuff. But then when I started doing stand-up comedy, that didn't really fit because that's all like pictures of hockey cards and stuff like that, right? So I started a separate Instagram under Sal J. Berry because Sal Berry was taken. So I was like, all right, well, I'll use my middle initials. So Sal J. Berry. And then I'm just like, all right. And then now when I do comedy, I'll be like, follow me on Instagram at Sal J. Berry. The J is for genius, right? So that's funnier than saying the J is for Joseph. But yeah, it's for Joseph. Sorry.
I just wanted to know. I wanted to scratch that itch. So, Sal, I want to thank you for taking time to come on and chat about NHL 94, video games, hockey, and a whole bunch of other things. So I really appreciate you doing this. It's been a lot of fun.
Len, thank you. This was a pleasure to just get to be on a podcast, but now I don't have to worry about editing it and post-production and cutting out ums and stuff like that. So the pleasure's all mine.
Well, thank you. So, any last words? Anything else? Yeah, I'm gonna throw the baton over to you before we close off. Like where people could find you.
Yeah,
The floor is yours,
if
buddy.
you like hockey cards and hockey culture, please check out my blog puckjunk.com. If you like hockey cards especially, I encourage you to check out our podcast at puckjunk.com/podcast. And I also do a weekly email newsletter about hockey cards and hockey collectibles, and you can find that at puckjunk.com/newsletter.
Well, thank you very much. I'll put those in the show notes. So if anybody is looking for them, it'll be easy to find. So, Sal, thanks so much. And with
Thank
that,
you.
keep your stick on the ice, controller plugged in. We'll be back at this very soon.